Friday, time for a history briefing. So I am on Hunter Avenue at 721 Hunter Avenue, which is about a block southeast of the optometry school here on campus. I'm going to talk a little bit about why this plays into history. But first, I want to point out there's a quote that the president read at the bicentennial luncheon. It's one of my favorite IU quotes. It's by William O'Brien, who is president of IU, and he says, "I covet true patriotism for our university. No bragging, no pretense that anything is better than it is, no easygoing tolerance of what should not be tolerated, but also ability to see the greatness before our eyes when it's here at home. I'm for those who see our university as it is with all its wrinkles and scars." It's one of my favorite IU history quotes, one of my favorite William O'Brien quotes as well. So I'm going to talk today. So one of the things that we hear about is the racial integration of ROTC, and this is often on the list of things that Herman Wells did in the late 1930s. But it's important to know that was actually a reintegration of ROTC, and we didn't know this before. We just recently sort of discovered that this was the case. Recently, as in a couple years ago, discovered that this was the case. The reason we discovered that was because 1917, when ROTC first started here, I ran across this memo from 1917 that is talking about Wilson, Vosh, and Eagleson and him wanting to adjust some classes in his ROTC drill schedule times. And they say, no, well, Wilson, Vosh, and Eagleson was the son of the first African-American athlete at IU. And he would later go on to marry Frances Marshall, as in the Neil Marshall Center. And he would be a African-American officer in World War I as well. And so I'm familiar with the name and I know him, and so this kind of clued me in a little bit that there was something to this, and that there was an actual racial integration story of ROTC before that that I needed to flesh out a little bit and figure out. So I started doing a little bit of digging to try and figure out a little bit more. And during World War I, ROTC became something called SATC, the Student Army Training Corps, which was a full-time active duty Army program that was stationed here at IU. And basically, almost all the male students signed up to be in it. You wore a uniform to class every day. You took Army classes in addition to your regular IU classes. But you still lived on college campus preparing to go into the Army. And basically, what they did is there was such a need for barracks, but there weren't barracks, that they just took fraternity houses and they turned the fraternity houses into barracks. And so you can look through and see, this is the 1919 yearbook, and it'll actually say, like, you know, Phi Gam House, barracks number 5. Kappa Sig House, barracks number 6, and here's barracks number 7 and barracks number 9. There's no barracks number 8. And I thought that was weird, that there wasn't a barracks number 8. And so I did a little more digging and I ran across a list of the barracks that were in the archives, and it says barracks number 8 was 721 Hunter Avenue. And instantly that made sense because this was the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity house. Kappa Alpha Psi is a historically black fraternity. And so that clued me in. Wait a minute, so are we talking that, you know, at that point, the Army, their full-time unit that was stationed here, they had African Americans in the unit? So I managed to find this picture. This is one of the unit photos from the SATC, and if you look real closely down on this end of the photo, I don't know if this will show up in the video, you can see that there's definitely some African Americans that are in this. And I talked to some of the descendants of the Eagleson family, and they felt with pretty strong confidence that one of those was Wilson Eagleson. So we have some verification there. I did a little more digging, and in a completely separate file, I found this list of who lived in barracks number 8, and I cross-referenced the list of names, and here it is, Vosh and Wilson Eagleson, and a lot of these other names are verified as being African Americans. So this was basically, for all intents and purposes, the African American barracks during World War I, during the SATC period. For that reason, it was probably left out of the yearbook as a piece of that. There's not a lot of Kappa Alpha Psi or African American imagery in the yearbook until World War II. Now, it's easy to say, hey, at the time I thought, okay, well, we just left everybody living where they were, and that became their barracks sort of thing. You know, how intentional was this? Well, then later I ran across this letter from the University of the Army asking if it's okay to have segregated housing for the African-American soldiers, which is really kind of naive because the Army was hugely segregated at that point. But apparently IU didn't really know that. There's also a response back from the War Department saying, you're encouraged to have segregated barracks. That's the actual words that they use. You are encouraged to do that. So yeah, we didn't have racially integrated housing really until World War II time frame in the 1940s. Late 1940s, which is a whole nother story. It involves a lot of the veterans coming back and wartime issues of World War II. But this house plays a piece in that history. It's left out of the yearbook. It's not in there for the 1919 yearbook, but it was that barracks and it was that Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity house. So it's an important piece of our IU history. So that's your briefing for this week, and we'll see you next week.